Good evening. Our verse for this evening is Proverbs 1 verse 7, and it says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, but fools despise wisdom and discipline." Most of what we read in the book of Proverbs are written by Solomon. Proverbs teaches us how wisdom merges with real life. As we go through life, we acquire so much knowledge, accumulate data, information mostly through education in schools, life's experiences, and today we get so much information through the internet and social media. Early as a child, we were taught to add and multiply numbers. We learned to read and write. Children today are computer literate. They even know how to buy things online from Lazada and Shopee. In high school, we discover physics, chemistry, biology, and other sciences. In college, you learn skills to engage in trade, profession like being a doctor, engineer, or we learn business practices, accounting principles, and many more. Throughout life, we also learn to relate to others. We relate to people socially, professionally, emotionally, and personally with family and friends, business partners, and many others. But all of this information has to be processed. And the means you use to process and more importantly, to apply this information requires wisdom. So what is wisdom? It is the ability to see life from God's perspective. How God sees family, business transactions, wealth, how God wants us to act while we are stuck in traffic in EDSA, or to wait patiently in line at the supermarket, or to get your RFID installed on your vehicles, or how to deal with difficult people. In other words, the everyday activities and the real-life situations that we face constantly. Wisdom allows us to live our lives in a way that is pleasing and glorifying to God. So how do we acquire wisdom? Solomon tells us in our verse that wisdom begins with the fear of the Lord. But fear, the word fear as used here, does not mean that we are to be afraid or scared of God. That is not the character of God, but it means reverence. Wisdom begins when we properly acknowledge who God is, to see His character, divine nature, that He is holy and sovereign, whose thoughts and ways are different and higher than ours. And because God is holy, divine, magnificent, sovereign, and loving, and many more, our only response is to offer Him the praise and the worship that He deserves. Wisdom then begins with our worship of God, and this is the foundation of wisdom. Our verse tells us that it is only when we approach God with an attitude of worship that we can discover what life is all about. We need to know the true significance of life to make wise decisions. And as we discover life's true meaning, we see God's hand and presence in every aspect of our life, and we are called to respond positively according to God's will and purpose. Wisdom tells us to worship God in our daily lives, whether it involves money, work, business, or marriage. We're called to honor God by obeying His will in every area of our life. In making decisions, wisdom and worship of God will prompt us to ask, what would Jesus do in this situation? Or what would God say? A wise person will humbly seek God's perspective on anything before acting. Worship is therefore seeing life from God's perspective and responding accordingly. But today we live in a world that offers its own definition of wisdom. Worldly wisdom tells us to look at life from a self-centered perspective. I, me, myself first before others. The world decides according to personal wants, status, ambitions, happiness, and material security. But this is not the wisdom. This is not wisdom, but this is the foolishness of the world. This is the challenge for us today. the wisdom to think, do, and say in a manner that will reflect the image of God in our lives. Remember that we were born in the image and likeness of God, and we have been predestined to reflect that image, so that in everything that we think, say, and do, we are to manifest God's image to others. And it is comforting to know that God will not leave us in this struggle. In James 1 verse 5, God tells us, "If any of you lacks wisdom, he should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to him." With wisdom, let every thought, action, decision we make become our act of worship to God. Good night po and stay blessed.